Welcome to another video, a video on armed conflict in Africa. And the question that we're asking ourselves, are armed conflicts in Africa on the rise? So don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Also click on the notification icon so that whenever you upload a new video you are notified. Also comment, share and like. Moving back to our topic of discussion today, we are looking at the armed conflicts in Africa, and the question that we're asking ourselves is whether these conflicts are on the rise. Statistics point that armed conflicts are on the increase in the continent. One body, the Armed Conflict Location and Even Data ACLED project. These are an organization that monitors incidents of conflict around the globe. So this institution found that there have been more incidents of armed conflict in Africa, with the last 3 years recording the highest figures. In 2019, there were more than 20,000 incidences of violence. This was an increase from by 36% from the previous year. Year 2020 and 2021 have also experienced a lot of violence and armed conflicts, and they may turn out to be the most violent years in the recent history. All the corners of the continent have experienced armed conflict in the recent past, from the south, from the north, east and west of the continent. And one thing that many seem to agree is that these conflicts need to be brought to an end. They need to be resolved, and as quickly as possible. This is, if the country has to prosper, conflict must be eliminated in the continent, so that we can be able to prosper and also compete with other parts of the world. It's only in Africa where conflict has been increasing. Other continents have been relatively peaceful, and addressing these conflicts will give rise to prosperity in Africa, reduce poverty, reduce suffering, and bring so many other benefits to the continent. So what are these conflicts that are bringing shame to the continent? So let's look at these conflicts and how they have played over the years. One of the worst conflicts of 2020 and 2021 is the Tigray conflict in Ethiopia. Although Ethiopia has had its fair share of conflict, there has been an attempt to bring peace and prosperity in this country, especially the last 4 years. When the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came to power, he had an ambitious reform project, but now he is facing the greatest threat, as various political groupings are seeking, or they are taking advantage of the newly opened political space. This has resulted in widespread communal violence and tensions within the ruling party, with Abiy's government struggling to get grip on the situation. How the Prime Minister responds to this threat may well determine the future of Africa's second most populous country, and it will have an enormous impact on the stability of the Horn of Africa as a whole. There has been several conflicts that have been reported in Ethiopia, but the main one is the Tigray conflict. On November 2020, the regional militias, which are loyal to the Tigray People Liberation Front (TPLF), which acts as the administration of the Tigray region, they attacked the Ethiopian National Defense Forces (ENDF) Northern Command. This sparked a war between the TPLF and the federal government. The Ethiopian Federal Forces began an onslaught on Tigray region after that Tigrayan attack. By November towards the end of 2020, the army had entered the Tigrayan capital, Mekele. Tigray People's Liberation Front (TPLF) leaders left the city, claiming the wish to spare the civilians. Although much remains unclear, given the media blackout, the violence has continued and it has killed thousands of people, including many civilians. There has been displacement of more than 1 million people internally, with some around 50,000 having to flee to Sudan. The Tigrayan crisis has its roots stretching back to years. Ethiopian Prime Minister had come to power in 2018 after the protest, which largely driven by the simmering anger at the then ruling coalition, which had been in power since 1991 and which the TPLF dominated. Abiy's tenure, which began with significant effort at reforming repressive government system, has been marked by a loss of influence for Tigrayan leaders who complain of being scapegoated for previous abuses. Abiy's ally accused TPLF elites of seeking to maintain a disproportionate share of power, obstructing reform and stoking trouble through violence. The Tigray dispute is Ethiopia's most bitter, but there has been wider fault lines. Power regions are at loggerheads with the supporters of Ethiopian ethnic federalist system, a system which devolves power to the ethnically defined regions, and that the TPLF was instrumental in its designing. So they are battling that system, and opponents believe that it entrenches ethnic identity and fosters division. While many Ethiopians blame the TPLF for oppressive rule, the Tigrayan party is not alone in feeling that Abiy's aim to do away with the system in a quest to centralize authority. Notably, Abiy critics in the restrictive Oromia region, which is the most popular, share the view of, despite Abiy's own Oromo heritage. The conflict is taking an ugly turn. Although there has been attempts to broker peace, both sides remain adamant. Ethiopia federal government has rallied a strong force to repel the TPLF, who had claimed win over some territory. TPLF has joined forces with other militias, including the breakaway Oromo Front, Oromo Liberation Front (OLF) Shane. Ethiopian Prime Minister has asked the citizens to arm themselves and fight against the enemy. He is now at the battleground, and on several occasions he has been visiting the Ethiopian forces in several areas. In the recent past, the government forces has claimed victory against TPLF. Ethiopia government claims that outside forces are supporting the TPLF, while there has been some argument that these are proxy war, where countries such as Russia, China, Iran are supporting the government, while the Western powers are supporting the TPLF. African Union has tried to broker peace, but the process has been slow, as both sides are not ready to negotiate. This is a conflict that needs to come to an end as quickly as possible, as it is threatens to spill over to other regions of Ethiopia, which are equally in turmoil. And this situation may get worse, given that there are conflicts in the neighboring country. There are conflicts. There's a conflict, an ongoing conflict in South Sudan, in Somalia, and other countries in this region. So these are conflicts that needs to be resolved as quickly as possible. But the ugly turn that this conflict has turned might mean that it might continue for some time if the TPLF forces do not surrender as asked by the Prime Minister. So another region that is experiencing conflict in Africa is Mozambique. Mozambique has, just like Ethiopia, has had its fair share of conflict for several years, although there was a a peace deal that was signed between the ruling party and Renamo. There continues to be some main opposition groups. They have continued to wage war against the government, but this is not the biggest conflict as at time. There is what is more disturbing: the insurgency in the northern Cabo Delgado province, which shows no signs of slowing down, even though the exact identity of the insurgent remains murky. The presence of foreign powers, especially the Russian private contractors, the Wagner, is also likely to worsen the situation. A radical Islamist militant have been trying for a while to establish the so-called Islamic Caliphate in the province of Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, but their efforts have met resistance from the Mozambique state and law enforcement authorities. The insurgent groups such as Ansar al-Sunnah have been targeting the servicemen and civilians in the region, although there are no statistics on the casualties. In March 2020, the Islamist insurgent went as far as capturing one of the port city of Masimboa da Praia and wreaked havoc in that city and its infrastructure. The rebels were forced to withdraw only 2 days later, and they retaliated by carrying out different raids, including one attack which was deadly on April 7, 2020, where more than 50 villagers in Taxi lost their lives. The insurgents' attacks and counterattacks have been taking place repeatedly in Mozambique in 2020 and even in 2021, but news of the events rarely make it to major media outlets due to limits on the freedom of media. The world is taking action, though this has been said to have taken so long. Mozambique is getting some assistance from different parts. South African Development Corporation partner states have sent military assistance. We have Western powers also helping the country to fight the insurgency. Russia is also said to be on the ground among other entities. Conflict continues, but there is hope that the militant will be weakened. Although being an insurgency, it's hard to address, it's hard to deal with such kind of situations. The fighting might continue, or the violence might continue, but with the presence of these assistance, the militants might be weakened and eventually disappearing altogether. Central African Republic is another region that has been in conflict for so long, making this country one of the poorest. Although it has a lot of resources, it remains to be one of the poorest countries in Africa and even in the world. So in the center of the continent, there have been flare-ups of violence in the Central African Republic, and this suggests that the peace agreement, which was made in 2007, is not holding. Since this country achieved its independence, it has had a shaky political history, which is characterized by endemic instability, military coups, and other power transitions which are scarred by violence. The current Central African Republic civil war is an ongoing armed conflict which has been there since 2012, involving the government rebels from the involving the government and also the rebels from the Seleka coalition and anti-Balaka militias. Previously, a peace agreement had been brokered following the conflict that lasted from 2004 to 2007. But the new conflict arose when a coalition of varied rebels groups known as Seleka accused the government of failing to abide by peace agreements. They went ahead and captured many towns in 2012 and seized the capital in 2013. There has been a change of leadership several times, but peaceful settlement has not been achieved. Much of the tension in this country is over religious identity between Muslim Seleka fighters and Christian anti-Balaka, and ethnic differences among ex-Seleka functions and historical antagonism between agriculturists, who largely comprise of anti-Balaka and nomadic groups, which comprise most of the Seleka fighters. Other contributing factors to this conflict uh, include the struggle for control of resources, especially diamonds, which are in plenty in this country, and also influence from other region powers such as Chad, Sudan, Rwanda, and international powers such as France and Russia. It is estimated that more than 1.1 million people have fled their homes in a country of about 5 million people. This is the highest ever recorded in the country. Although the conflict has calmed down over the last 3 years, there are large sections that remain outside the government control. The current security dynamics and ways in which the conflict has become internationalized also pose a threat and complicates the prospect for resolving this conflict. There has been a unilateral ceasefire which was announced by the government on 15th October 2021, and this represents a step forward in revitalization of the peace process. So this is another conflict that needs to be resolved. So it's complex. It needs to be resolved so that this country can know peace, so that people in this country can enjoy their normal lives and also be able to prosper. The country, as we have seen, is endowed with a lot of resources, and if we exploit it and exploit it fairly, this is a country that can move ahead and prosper. Another country in Central Africa region that is experiencing turmoil is Cameroon. On the west coast of Africa, there is another crisis which is going on in Cameroon. In 2016, English-speaking lawyers, students, and teachers in Cameroon began protesting against their cultural marginalization by the Francophone-dominated government, leading to a violent crackdown by security officers or security forces. In October 2017, Anglophone separatists proclaimed independence and declared a new state of Ambazonia in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon. Since then, armed separatists and Cameroonian security forces have continued to clash, resulting in widespread abuses against the civilian population by both sides of the conflict. Security forces have perpetrated extrajudicial killing, banned Anglophone villages, and subjected individuals with alleged separatist ties to torture and ill treatment. Security forces have also been accused of widespread sexual and gender-based violence. Armed separatists have also perpetrated abuses, including kidnapping and killing civilians. In 2016, more than 4,000 civilians and hundreds of members of the security forces have been killed in Anglophone regions. Separatists have banned government education and frequently attack schools and teachers, resulting in 80% of the schools in the two regions being closed or destroyed, and at least 700,000 children denied an education. The security situation has further deteriorated since the beginning of 2021 due to increased fighting between the government and the armed groups. Approximately 30% of the health facilities are unable to operate, with at least 29 reported attacks on facilities in the northwest and southwest region between January and June 2021. A significant increase in targeted attacks on humanitarian workers over the past year has also restricted the delivery of vital assistance. Meanwhile, the use of improvised devices, IEDs, and kidnappings have increased. In the first 5 months of 2021, armed groups have carried out 27 IED attacks in 13 towns, more than in all previous years of crisis combined. So this shows that the conflict is getting ugly and complicated. So limited attempts have been made to find a solution to the conflict. During June 2019, Switzerland mediated peace talks, which were followed by national dialogue organized by the President Pierre that October. In 2021 February, Cardinal Petrov Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State of Vatican, visited Cameroon and announced the readiness of the Catholic Church to facilitate a dialogue between the government and the armed groups. During the October, Cameroon Prime Minister Joseph Ngute visited the Anglophone regions to call for peace, but added that those who refuse to lay down their weapons will be killed. With more than 200 different ethnic communities living in Cameroon, there is a history of intercommunal tensions in some parts of the country. In the far north region, violent clashes broke out between Shao Arab cattle herders and Mogzoon fishermen in Kuseri on 10th August. The ensuing clashes killed 45 people and displaced more than 23,000 people. In the northwest, tensions between the Muslim Mbororo Fulani herders and Christian farming communities, particularly in the Bamela grasslands, have led to violent clashes. Armed separatist groups have also perpetrated attacks on the Fulani communities, forcing more than 12,000 people to flee and killing 250 since 2016. Fulani vigilante committees established in response to these attacks have allegedly collaborated with the government military operators against Anglophone separatists. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimates that at least 712,000 people have been internally displaced by the violence in the northwest and southwest regions, with more than 67,000 having fled to Nigeria. So this is a conflict that has a great toll, especially in that region, the northwest and southwest region of the Cameroon, which is mostly the English-speaking region. So this conflict also needs to be resolved, and it should be resolved amicably. If the people of Amazonia feel that they don't want to be part of Cameroon, they should be granted freedom. In return, if the government should also listen to these people, they have a case. They feel that they have been marginalized for so many years by the francophone dominated government. So probably they can listen to their grievances, and if they can't resolve, then probably as they call, referendum should be held, and the pathways that had happened in some other parts of the Africa, if that's the only way to solve the conflict. A similar conflict is also simmering or has been ongoing in Nigeria. We know Nigeria to be one of the largest economies in Africa, but the country is not is not immune to instability and civil wars. Many will still remember the country's bloody civil war over Biafra, the region bordering Cameroon and Amazonia, which lasted between 1967 and 1970 and claimed between 45,000 and 100 lives, with around 2 million people more dying due to ensuing famine. As of 2021, the security problems of Nigeria have not been solved yet. The country, which has more than 200 ethnic groups, often speaking different languages and practicing different religions, often groups claiming to represent Christians, Muslims, and those who practice indigenous African regions, decide to solve their problem by resorting to military confrontation. We have the Boko Haram in the north, which has caused a lot of suffering for the people in that region. Boko Haram is a radical jihad sect which is active in north and northeast of Nigeria, and is currently the greatest threat to national peace. It began its campaign of terror around 2002, and the group has a reputation of brutal violence, which includes all forms of massacre, bombing, abduction, and destruction of mosques and churches. The group has also targeted people and places in nations neighboring Nigeria like Cameroon, Chad, Niger, among others. In 2020, Boko Haram took responsibility for the bombing that occurred on January 6 in Gamburu, Borno State, and the year that followed was characterized by destabilizing activities across the countries, including kidnappings and beheadings. Apart from that, Nigeria has another problem. The indigenous people of Biafran, IPOB, which is a secessionist group that advocates for the creation of an independent country of Biafra, has been fighting the federal government. The pro-Biafran movement, led by the Nigerian minority Igbo community, has deep historical roots. In 1967, following two failed military coups and targeted ethnic violence and persecution, the Igbo people came together to form the secessionist state of Biafra, triggering a brutal 2-year civil war, during which the Nigerian military imposed a blockade of the state, which caused between 500,000 and 2 million civilians to die out of starvation. Ultimately, due to this blockage and starvation, the Biafran people surrendered to the federal government, but their agitation to form their own country did not stop at that. The anti-government sentiments have remained, and there has been hardened in the recent years. So this is another conflict that needs to be resolved, because it's threatening the prosperity of Nigeria, one of the most developed economies in Africa. Another conflict that has been ongoing is the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo conflict. This country, just like Ethiopia, Chad, Central African Republic, Mozambique, has had its fair share of conflict. The country still suffers from the wounds of a devastating war, the First Congo War of between 1996 and 1997, which claimed the lives of up to 800,000 people and left more than 200,000 people homeless. The Second Congo War, which was between 1998 and 2003, had even higher casualties, where over 2.7 million to 5.4 million people dying. So these deaths are indirectly and directly related to the Second Congo War. Although the latter conflict came to an end in 2003 with the birth of the transitional government of the Democratic Republic of Congo, violence is still rampant in certain parts of the country, especially in the east. The ongoing disputes over national electoral politics spill over from the conflicts, and refugees from Uganda, Rwanda, and Central African Republic, and the presence of valuable ores such as columbite, tantalites, coltan, continue to fuel instability in some regions such as Kivu, Kasai, and Ituri regions. We all know that DRC is a sleeping giant, and if these conflicts are resolved, this is one country that can take great stride. Another region that has been experiencing conflict is the Sahel region of Africa. So this is a region that stretches from all the way from Mauritania up to Sudan, Eritrea on the eastern side. So the crisis engulfing the Sahel region of North Africa continues to worsen, with inter-ethnic violence increasing and jihadists extending their reach. Recent years has been the deadliest since the crisis started in 2012, when Islamist militants overran northern Mali, plunging the region into protracted instability. Jihadist control or their shadow presence across the large regions of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. They have intensified counter-terrorism activities led by French in 2020, and this has dealt militants some blows. Also, entry of Russia through its private contractors has also complicated the situation. Now this seems to be a proxy war between some forces, Russian and France. The coups which have been happening in this region has also worsened the situation. The change of regimes, we have heard of change of regime in Mali, in Niger, and even in Chad. So this situation have worsened the situation. Although the assistance from the foreign military operations seems to have brought some semblance of peace, this might be used as an opportunity to continue conflict in the region, so that foreign powers can continue probably exploiting resources in this region. Somalia has been also dealing with the problem of Alshabaab, and this conflict is now entering its 15th year, but the end is not in sight. So Alshabaab remains potent. The group controls large section of the country, especially in southern and central Somalia, and extends a shadow presence far beyond these regions. And they have had regular attacks in Somalia capital, Mogadishu. While Somali leaders and international leaders partner, all recognize in principle that the challenge from the Al-Shabaab cannot be tackled with force alone, few articulate clear alternatives. Talks with the militants might be an option, but that our movement leaders have given a little indication that they want a political settlement. So the upcoming presidential vote probably might provide a solution to this ongoing conflict. So it's being waited to see whether a solution will be found. But this presidential election is also seen as a problem, since if there will be a contested vote, it will provoke a political crisis that will widen the gap between Mogadishu and the regions, and this might trigger more clan violence, and the problem of Al-Shabaab will continue. There's a similar problem in Libya, although things seems to be easing up. Rival military coalitions in Libya are no longer fighting, and the UN has started the negotiations which are aimed at reunifying the country, reaching a lasting peace, but this is an uphill task. Fighting seems unlikely to flare up in the immediate future because outside factors, while keen to consolidate their influence, do not want another round of open hostility. But the longer the ceasefire terms go unfulfilled, there is a higher risk of conflict coming back and provoking a return of war. To avoid this outcome, the United Nations should help come up with a roadmap of unifying Libya's divided institutions and de-escalate tensions among the forces. South Sudan is also experiencing, so this conflict in Libya seems to have subsided because there is no open hostility, but what we have now is a fragile peace, and things might flare up, especially if there are delays as far as roadmap to peace and unification of divided country are concerned. So UN has a role to ensure that the process is escalated and solution is found, so as to avoid a situation where we go back to where we were some years back. So another country that is also experiencing some problem which are deep is South Sudan. South Sudan is one of the youngest countries in the world, having gained its independence in 2011, but 2 years later, after the death of the founding father Garang, and taking over of the country by President Kiir, conflict started in 2013 when President Kiir, Silva Kiir, accused his Vice President Riek Machar of attempting a coup. Although he denied this, he denied any active role in that coup. He fled and started his own opposition, the SPLM opposition. Fighting has broke out in that country between the SPLM and the Riek Machar faction, and this ignited a civil war that has continued for the last 8 years. There has been several attempts to broker peace, and ceasefires have been made, but they have not lasted long. Fighting continues up to now, and the country, some sections of the country, are experiencing armed conflict. So these conflicts all these conflicts that we have tackled, right from Ethiopia, Mozambique, Somalia, Libya, South Sudan, Central African Republic, DRC, Cameroon, and Nigeria, they need to be resolved if the continent is to prosper and be able to compete with other parts of the world. Most of these conflicts are resource based. When you look at DRC, when you look at Mozambique, when you look at Somalia, Libya, South Sudan, these conflicts have one denominator. They are fighting over resources, and there are also some foreign interference in so many of these conflicts. Ethiopia is accusing foreign powers of interfering or favoring one side of the war. The same case in Central African Republic. We have even had so many of these conflicts being foreign powers interfering. We have Russia, which has been mentioned in so many places. Talk of Mozambique, the private contractor, the Wagner Group. They have their boots in Mozambique, they are in Chad, they are in Central African Republic, they are in Mali, and so many other parts of the world. Talk of France, talk of United States. So in some cases this is seen as proxy war, and when you have these powers taking sides, the situation becomes complex and it becomes hard to resolve. African Union needs to step up its efforts and come up with a homegrown solution. African Union needs to take its position and try to resolve these conflicts without taking sides in any part of these conflicts. So if the AU takes its rightful position, it can help in solving this conflict without having to ask for outside assistance, because this outside assistance comes with strings attached. Some of these powers are using these opportunities to exploit the African countries. They would like the conflict to continue so that they continue enjoying some of the resources that we have, and this has been termed in some quarters as the neo-colonialism. So Africa needs to wake up and stop these conflicts, because they are a shame and they are derailing the progress that Africa should want to make so that it can compete fairly in the world arena. So we come to an end of our video today. We have been looking at the conflict in Africa, and we have seen that conflict in Africa is increasing, and the only continent where conflict and mostly armed conflict is on the rise. So Africa needs to rise and stop these chaos. Africa needs to rise and stop these wars. Fighting among ourselves does not help, and we should stop the foreign powers from interfering with our affairs. It's because they have an interest and they would like us to continue fighting so that they can continue exploiting our resources. So thank you for watching this video. I invite you for more videos in the future, more of such videos and others. So don't forget to subscribe, share, comment, like, and also hit the notification icon so that whenever we upload a new video, you get notified. So thank you.